It all started on a quiet morning in a peaceful neighborhood, the kind of place where nothing really ever happens until today. A local HOA board member, known around the block for her strict rules and loud opinions, decided to take things into her own hands. Let's just call her Karen. She spotted an open parking spot near the community clubhouse and, without a second thought, pulled her car right into it. What she didn't realize was that she had just parked in a clearly marked military supply zone, a restricted area used for routine deliveries to a nearby training center. Within minutes, things took a wild turn. Military personnel arrived, armed and fully suited, surrounding the vehicle with practiced precision. That's when Karen came storming out of the building, yelling at the guards, demanding answers, and insisting they had no right to touch her car. Bystanders watched in disbelief as her voice echoed across the lot. Her complaints got louder, and her frustration hit a boiling point. But the guards stood their ground, calm and collected, following protocol. What happens next? Let's just say, Karen wasn't expecting what came out of the back of that military truck, and it completely changed the tone of the entire confrontation. Stick around, because this story is only getting started. Turns out that military supply zone wasn't just for random equipment drops. According to a few neighbors, the community had been notified weeks ago, flyers, emails, even signs posted around the clubhouse, that the area would be temporarily used for sensitive deliveries tied to a nearby base training program. Most folks stayed away, not wanting to get involved with anything military-related. But Karen? She either missed the memo or chose to ignore it. She was known for bending rules when they didn't suit her, especially if it meant proving a point. Now, as the back of the military truck opened up, a few large crates were carefully unloaded, guarded closely by uniformed personnel. No one really knew what was inside, but the guards moved with a sense of purpose, and that alone was enough to keep people at a distance. Karen, however, was still shouting, trying to get someone, anyone, to listen. She claimed her rights were being violated, that this was community and parking space. What made it even more intense was the quiet murmur spreading through the small crowd. People were starting to wonder, what exactly was in those crates? Why were they being delivered to a residential neighborhood? And most importantly, what kind of trouble had Karen actually gotten herself into? The truth was starting to feel a lot bigger than just a parking violation. As more neighbors gathered, phones came out, recording every second of the standoff. The HOA president, clearly flustered, showed up minutes later trying to de-escalate the scene. He quietly pulled Karen aside, whispering something that made her expression change, just for a second. But she snapped right back into her usual mode, yelling about overreach, lack of communication, and her authority as a board member. What she didn't know was that the military team had already filed a report and were waiting on a supervisor from the base to arrive in person. Meanwhile, one of the residents, an older man named Mr. Alvarez, who had served in the military years ago, stood watching from his porch. He leaned over to his neighbor and muttered, "This isn't just a supply run. Those crates, that formation, that's a security protocol. Something serious is happening." But when asked what he meant, he just shook his head and went back inside. Back at the clubhouse, rumors were flying. Some thought the HOA had made a secret deal with the base to rent out part of the property. Others believed this was some kind of drill, a test to see how civilians react under pressure. But the truth was still unclear, and Karen, unknowingly, had placed herself at the center of something much larger than just an illegal parking spot. The tension in the air was palpable, like a ticking time bomb. Karen's voice grew louder with each passing minute as she stood there, arms crossed, challenging the guards and anyone who would listen. She demanded to speak with the highest-ranking officer, convinced that someone was trying to intimidate her. The crowd had now swelled, a mix of curious onlookers and worried residents, all eyes on the scene unfolding. But then the situation shifted. A black SUV rolled up, the tires screeching slightly as it came to a halt. The doors opened, and two uniformed officers stepped out. This wasn't just a supervisor. These were people with an air of authority that silenced the chatter in an instant. One of them, a tall man with a stern look, made his way directly to Karen, who stood firm, eyes wide with disbelief. "You're the one who parked in the military zone?" he asked, his voice calm but heavy with underlying authority. Karen, still not fully grasping the gravity of the situation, crossed her arms tighter and nodded, preparing for a fight. But as the officer moved closer, the air felt thicker, like something huge was about to unfold. The crowd fell silent, holding their breath. Behind the officer, the military truck's cargo area had just been closed. But Karen wasn't paying attention to that. She didn't notice the other vehicles pulling in behind the truck, all the special markings on them, something that made the hair on the back of people's necks stand up. What exactly were they guarding now? And what were they really here to do? The suspense hung heavy in the air, everyone wondering if the situation would explode into a confrontation or something far worse. And just when it seemed like the officer was about to speak again, a sudden noise from the back of the military trucks sent a shockwave through the crowd. Everyone turned, unsure of what was about to happen. The sudden noise came from the back of the truck, a sharp metallic clang that echoed through the parking lot, followed by a low, rumbling sound that made the ground vibrate beneath everyone's feet. It wasn't just an accident or a slip of equipment. Something was happening. The crowd turned as one, all eyes fixed on the military truck, the tension growing like a storm about to break. At that moment, the officer who had been confronting Karen stepped back, his face hardening. His hand instinctively went to his earpiece. A few hushed words, barely audible to the crowd, made it clear that whatever was in those crates wasn't ordinary military supplies. It was something much more serious. The truck doors swung open again, this time revealing a heavily armored vehicle that had been hidden behind the crates. The officers moved quickly, forming a perimeter around it, as if bracing for something. Karen, oblivious to the rising danger, still stood her ground, her voice rising in frustration. But even she couldn't ignore the growing unease in the air now. Then, as the armored vehicle's engines rolled to life, a new figure emerged from the shadows, an individual in full tactical gear, face covered, moving with purpose. No one had seen him approach, and his presence immediately shifted the mood. He walked straight toward the officer, who nodded in acknowledgement, but the brief exchange between them felt like the calm before a storm. The crowd murmured nervously. Were they dealing with something far more dangerous than an accidental parking violation? The mystery deepened as the figure handed the officer something, a small sealed envelope. Whatever was inside, it clearly carried enormous weight. No one knew yet, but it was becoming painfully obvious that Karen's mistake had unwittingly pulled everyone into a much darker scenario. The stakes were no longer about parking or petty HOA rules. The question now was, asterisk, what had Karen gotten herself tangled up in, and how deep did it go, asterisk? As the armored vehicle's engines rumbled, the officers and the mysterious figure seemed to fall into a synchronized rhythm, preparing for something. The sealed envelope exchanged hands, and the crowd could feel the gravity of the situation growing heavier. Karen, still caught up in her outrage, demanded to know what was going on. But the officers and the mysterious man simply ignored her, their focus entirely on the unfolding situation. The officer who had been confronting Karen finally turned to face her, his expression now cold and calculated. "Ma'am, this isn't just a parking violation," he said, his voice steady but firm. "You've just parked in a high-security zone containing classified equipment. What you didn't know was that we've been tracking certain items moving through this area. Items linked to national security." Karen froze, her mouth hanging open. The realization hit her like a freight train. This wasn't some small mistake. Her defiance had just drawn attention to something much bigger, something far beyond her HOA politics. Just as the weight of the situation was sinking in, the mysterious figure in tactical gear finally spoke. His voice was sharp and low, laced with urgency. "The package is secure," he said to the officer, But then he turned to Karen. "You have no idea how close you came to making a disastrous mistake." The officer nodded and approached Karen, a finality in his movements. "You didn't just park here. You unknowingly interfered with an operation. And now, thanks to you, we have to escalate." Just as Karen opened her mouth to protest, the officer's hand raised, silencing her. "It's too late now. There's a much bigger target, and it's coming this way." The crowd was silent, confused. What was this bigger target? And what had Karen triggered? Just then, the ground beneath them vibrated once more, louder this time, like an earthquake starting from deep beneath the neighborhood. Karen's eyes widened, and the officer turned sharply, his face paling. "It's here," he muttered under his breath. Suddenly, a distant roar filled the air, louder than any truck, louder than any military engine. The sky darkened as something large and ominous appeared on the horizon. The crowd gasped. It wasn't a vehicle. It wasn't even a plane. It was something else entirely, a massive drone, far larger than anything anyone had ever seen. Its silhouette cut through the sky like a black shadow. Before Karen could even comprehend what was happening, the drone's engines began to hum a menacing tune, and the military team scrambled into action, retreating into their vehicles with a frantic urgency. The officer locked eyes with Karen one last time. "You have no idea what you've just unleashed." The drone hovered above them, a behemoth in the sky, its undercarriage glowing with something that sent a shiver down everyone's spine. The mystery of what Karen had stumbled into was far from over, but now it was clear that this story had escalated beyond anything anyone had imagined. As the drone began its descent, the screen cut to black, leaving the audience on the edge of their seats. What was about to happen? And what was the true purpose of the operation? The story wasn't over yet. It had only just begun.